Judson Hall, Burton Green, the musician, was banging on the inside chord for an hour and a half. Thank you so much. And then intermission, and then doing it more. So it was it was the very beginning, and nobody knew what they were doing except for Prabhupada. Everybody else was brand new in Krishna consciousness. And this is the next section. This is in New York City. The Gate Theater was a small auditorium on 2nd Avenue, about 10 blocks north of the storefront. And this is Satsvarupa speaking, the author of this book. We rented the Gate Theater for one night. It was a dark place painted all black. The theater was almost empty. We had an easel on stage with a painting of the Panchatattva. Swamiji spoke, and his talk became very technical. Pointing and referring back to the painting, he described each member of the Panchatattva. He first explained that Lord Chaitanya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appearing as a pure devotee. Lord Nityananda, to the right of Lord Chaitanya, is his first expansion, and to the right of Lord Nityananda is Advaita, who is the incarnation of the Supreme Lord. To the left of Lord Chaitanya, he said, is Gadadhar, the internal energy, and Srivas is the perfect devotee. So from the very beginning, it's not like Prabhupada was only teaching he was teaching the most simple things, but everything in Krishna consciousness is basic and simple. But but some things are obviously just do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that, and those things have to be said, and new devotees have to learn the most basic things. But Prabhupada was also teaching the most advanced things at the same time. He was teaching about Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, Sri Advaita, Gadadhar, and Srivas, and their particular positions as described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Prabhupada was started giving classes on the Chaitanya Charitamrita in the last couple of months at 26 2nd Avenue before he left for San Francisco. And up until then, it was Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, which are, you could say, more basic, but they're also Krishna's direct words. Like if you read and study the Bhagavad Gita, you're literally in the mind of Krishna. It's not, you could say this is, in Prabhupada said, this is the ABCs of spiritual life, but these are Krishna's direct words. And you hear the Bhagavad Gita, you're literally in Krishna's mind. It's what he's thinking, that's what Krishna is saying. So, but he also, towards the end of his initial stay at 26 2nd Avenue, he started giving classes on the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Satsvarupa Maharaj told us a few weeks ago, he said that when Prabhupada started giving classes in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he said, because you're a little advanced, and Satsvarupa Maharaj interjected there, he said, because you're a little advanced, and he said, we weren't. And he said, today I'm going to start giving lectures from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So So Prabhupada was teaching, of course he was teaching on the essence and specific points from the Chaitanya Charitamrita from the very beginning. And one of the first books he gave was the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which is directly from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So from the very beginning, Prabhupada was teaching from the Srimad Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so he started telling them about Panchatattva and their individual significance of each member of the Panchatattva. And Satsrup Maharaj continues here, he said, during the talk I was thinking this was maybe too elevated for the audience. And this was a lecture at a theater where all outside people were coming. It wasn't just for the devotees at 26 Second Avenue. It was for anybody coming here. So Satsrup Maharaj said, I was thinking that this was maybe too elevated for the audience, but I was sitting close beside Swamiji, and like the other devotees, I was really enjoying being with him. After the gate engagement, Swamiji and his disciples agreed that it was a waste of time trying to rent theaters. It was better to go to Tompkins Square Park. That was the best place for attracting people, and it didn't cost anything. This is the next section. It was 11 p.m. and only one light was on in Swamiji's apartment, in the kitchenette. Swamiji was staying up, teaching Kirtanananda and Brahmananda how to cook, because the next day, Sunday, they would be holding a feast for the public. Kirtanananda had suggested it be advertised as a love feast, and Swamiji had adopted the name. Although some thought it sounded strange at first to hear him say love feast. Of course, that's what prasadam is. It's a love feast. But that was kind of like a hippie kind of talk. We're having a love-in or a be-in. We're going to have a love feast. It was definitely appealing to the mentality of the people back then. But Prabhupada liked it. And for many years in the temple, devotees always called it the Sunday Love Feast. Now it's just the Sunday program and there's the Sunday festival, but for many years, everyone called it the Sunday Love Feast. The devotees had put up posters around the neighborhood and made a sign for the window of the storefront, and Swamiji had said he would cook enough for at least 50 people. He said that the love feast should become an important part of ISKCON. As he explained many times, food offered to Krishna becomes spiritual, and whoever eats the prasadam receives great spiritual benefit. Prasadam means mercy. His two helpers stood respectfully beside him, sometimes stepping back out of his way as he moved, and sometimes looking over his shoulder as he mixed spices or set a pan over the flame or called for another ingredient. He was stirring a big pot of sweet rice with a wooden spoon. It had to be stirred constantly and slowly adding milk. If the sweet rice burned, it would be ruined, he said. And he handed the spoon to Kirtananda. He next showed them how to make ghee by heating butter in a wok and separating the milk solids from the butter fat. And he simultaneously taught them how to make apple chutney. And it's true, if you burn anything with milk, if you burn sweet rice, it's just not good. If you don't burn it too bad, devotees used to try to cover the burn taste with, what was it? Vanilla flavor. And it would help, but you could still taste the burn. And cooks really got mad if you burnt any of the milk or burned the ghee. And I'm sure Prabhupada wouldn't have been pleased if they had burnt the sweet rice. Prabhupada was silent as he cooked. But when Brahmananda asked him how he had learned so much about cooking, Prabhupada said that he had learned by watching his mother. He laughed and said it had not been like it is in the West, where you take a lump of flesh from your refrigerator, throw it in a pan, boil it, sprinkle it with some salt, and then eat like an animal. And in Korea, he said, they eat dogs. But human beings should eat grains, fruits, vegetables, and milk, and the cow especially should not be killed. So Prabhupada was a little kid, but he learned just by watching his mother cook, he learned how to be like a really good cook. It illustrates the depth of Prabhupada's intelligence. That's not easy, especially for a kid like 5, 6, 10 years old, to learn how to cook everything just by watching your mother. It's pretty amazing. While Brahmananda cut the apples for the chutney and put them in a pot for steaming, and Kirtananda stirred the sweet rice, Swamiji prepared masala, the basic mixture of spices which he would soon add to the steaming apples. The familiar smell of red pepper and cumin seeds entered their nostrils sharply as the masala crackled and smoked in the hot ghee in the tiny frying pan. With 3 separate operations going on at once, sweet rice, steaming apples, and masala, Prabhupada cautioned Kirtananda to stir the sweet rice steadily and scrape the bottom of the pot, and he took the spoon for a moment from Kirtananda's hand and demonstrated how to stir it properly. Sweet rice, chutney, and certain other dishes could be made in advance of the feast, he explained, but many things would have to be done the next morning. Prabhupada rose early despite having kept late hours the night before, and after the morning class, he was back in the kitchen. Now, half a dozen disciples sat in his front room making dough for puris and samosas. He had shown them how to make the dough, and Umapati had kneaded for a while by pounding the soft dough with his fists. But Brahmananda was better at it, socking the weight of his wrestler's body onto a large lump of dough. As Swamiji entered the room to examine the quality of the puris, his disciples looked up at him respectfully. They were always serious when he was present. He picked up a puri and examined it. It is not to the standard, he said, but it will have to do. Then, amid crumpled rejects and oddly shaped pieces of dough, he squatted down beside his helpers, who were trying as best they could, though making a mess. He took a small ball of dough, pressed it flat with his fingers, and then deftly rolled it out until it curled around the rolling pin and then fell off, a perfectly round puri. He held it up, displaying a translucent, thin, but not too thin, patty of dough. Make them like this, he said, but hurry. On discovering that the dough was too stiff, Swamiji added a little ghee and then a little milk and kneaded the dough to a softer texture. Everything should be just right, he said, and his disciples took to their menial tasks with concentrated earnestness. Who among them had ever heard of these things before? Puris and samosas. It was all new, and the challenge something very important. It was part of devotional service. Swamiji did much of the cooking as he simultaneously supervised his helpers. He was always near, walking barefoot back to the kitchen, then to the front room, then to his own room in the rear. And even when he went back to his room, his disciples could see him through the window in the wall. Swamiji saw each of the nearly 12 dishes through its final stages, and his disciples carried them into the front room in pots, one by one, and placed them before the picture of Lord Chaitanya. There was halava, dal, 2 sabjis, fancy rice, puris, samosas, sweet rice, apple chutney, and gulab jamans, or sweet balls, ISKCON bullets. And that was a typical feast when I started coming to the temple a few years later. Sunday feast was a big feast. Prabhupada had personally spent much time slowly deep frying the sweet balls on a low heat until they had turned golden brown and full. Then, one by one, he had lifted them out of the ghee with a slotted spoon and put them to soak in sugar syrup. He recognized that these golden ghee-fried milk balls soaked with sugar water were his disciples' favorite prasadam treat. He called them ISKCON bullets because they were weapons in the war against Maya. He even allowed that a jar of ISKCON bullets floating in their syrup be always on hand in the front room where his disciples could take them without asking permission and without observing any regulated hours. They could take as many as they liked. Kirtanananda brought in the samosa filling, which he had prepared from spinach and green peas cooked to a paste and which the Swami had heavily spiced. Stuffing the samosas was an art, and Swamiji showed them how to do it. He took a semicircle of dough, shaped it into a cone, stuffed it with a spoonful of filling, and then folded the top over and sealed it. A samosa, ready for the hot ghee. Achyutananda carried the imperfectly shaped puris into the kitchen, where he and Kirtananda deep fried them 2 at a time. If the temperature of the ghee, the consistency of the dough, and the size, shape, and thickness of the puris were all just right, the puris would cook in only a few seconds, rising to the surface of the ghee, where they would inflate like little balloons. The cooks then stood them on an edge in a cardboard box to drain off the excess ghee. Yeah. Yeah. There was no oil.
They not use at all. Zero.
What?
Zero. No oil.
I don't think we used any oil at all here. Of course, we had a lot of ghee, and butter was cheap back then. Butter is really expensive now, but yeah, we had barrels full of ghee in the kitchen here. We got 900 pounds of ghee butter almost for free every month. 900 pounds of butter is a lot of butter. And it makes a lot of ghee. So we always had 3 or 4 big barrels full of ghee in the kitchen.
So high quality.
Yeah, high quality.
How did they get that time? So much ghee?
Well, there was so much surplus of food that was produced by the farmers. So a lot of it, they threw thousands and millions of tons of it in the ocean. But a lot of it, the government bought it off the farmers really cheap and either threw it away or they did, and they also had programs to distribute it to charity groups who distributed food to the public. So we qualified for that. I think we paid something for it, but it was very little. The first few love feasts were not very well attended, but the devotees were so enthusiastic. As they completed the last... Achyutananda... Oh, I read that, man. As they completed the last preparations for the feast, Swamiji's disciples washed the stiff dough from their hands and went down to the storefront where they set out the straw mats and awaited the guests and the feast. Upstairs, Swamiji and a couple of his cooks offered all the preps to Lord Chaitanya, reciting the Parampara prayer. The first few love feasts were not very well attended, but the devotees were so enthusiastic about the feast prasadam that they showed no disappointment over the scarcity of guests. They were prepared to eat everything. Satsvarup Maharaj speaking, there was something called Brahmin spaghetti, which was rice flour noodles cooked in ghee and soaked in sugar water. And there was halava, pushpan rice with fried cheese balls, samosas, split mung beans fried into crunchy pellets and mixed with salt and spices, puris, gulab jamans, and everything was succulent. That was the word Hayagriva used. Yes, he would say, expressing it waggishly. Everything was very succulent. Eating the feast was an intense experience. We were supposed to be subduing our senses all week, following strict regulations, controlling the tongue, and the feast was a kind of reward. Swamiji and Krishna were giving us a taste of full spiritual ecstasy, even though we were still beginners and still in the material world. Before taking my plateful, I would pray, please let me remain in Krishna consciousness, because it is so nice and I am so fallen. Let me serve Swamiji and let me now enjoy this feast in transcendental bliss. Nice prayer. And I would begin eating, going from one taste sensation to another, the good rice, the favorite vegetable, the bread, and then saving the gulab jamun for last, thinking, I can have seconds, and if I like, I can have thirds. We would keep our eyes on the big pots, confident that there was as much as we wanted. It was a time of rededication. We all enjoyed with completely open relish and sense gratification. Eating was very important. Gradually, attendance picked up. The feasts were free, and they were reputed to be delicious. Mostly local hippies came, but occasionally a higher class of experimenting New Yorkers or even the parents of one of the devotees would come. When the small temple was filled, guests would sit in the courtyard. They would take their prasadam laid in paper plates and their wooden spoons into the backyard garden and sit beneath the fire escape or at a picnic table or anywhere. And after eating, they would go back into the storefront for more. Devotees were stationed behind the pots of prasadam, and the guests would come by for seconds. The other tenants were not very happy about seeing the courtyard full of festive guests. It's like our neighbors here aren't very happy. You sit outside in the summer taking prasadam. It's always like that. And the devotees tried to pacify them by bringing them plates of prasadam. Although Swamiji would not go down to the temple, he would take a plate in his room and hear with pleasure about the success of his new program. One time, the devotees were eating so ravenously that they threatened to eat everything available before the guests had all been served. And Kirtanananda had to admonish them for their selfish attitude. Gradually, they were understanding that the Sunday feast was not just for their fun and pleasure, but to bring people to Krishna consciousness. And I'll tell you just one little incident from here in this temple. We used to bring in the beginning, first we make plates, and while the lecture was going on, and give them out when the lecture was over. And then devotees would come around with seconds with the pots. And there was one prep that the cook made one time, sweet rice, ice cream, just boiled down milk. And they made it like the day before, a couple of big 5-gallon trays of it, put it in the freezer the day before, so it was real ice cream. It was solid. And I tell you, when devotees the people at the temple, the guests and the devotees used to wait while people brought around the preps for seconds. But for that prep, devotees would follow the servers around. We used to serve on the second floor and the stairs and out in the lobby and in the temple room. And the people would follow the servers around for that one. I never saw them do that with any other prep. They really liked it. And I'll tell you one quick incident and this is off a different point, but a basic Krishna conscious point about envy. And there was one lady, her and her husband started coming to the temple in like 1969. Her husband, I think he's in one of the pictures outside on the wall with Prabhupada being greeted at the airport. And so her and her husband used to come from that time. And so this was several years later, like about 1977 or 78. And she had a child by then, or maybe a couple of children. And during the feast, the lecture, she was out in the hallway beside the devotees who were making the plates at the table. And some of the little kids, including her son, named Krishna Das, were up on the 3rd floor in the hallway playing and inevitably making noise. And she knew the voice of her own son, and the kids were like, getting a little beyond the point of just playing happily together, and they were like fighting a little bit, and she could hear it in her son's voice, and she was standing right out here in this hallway, and she just called up the stairs to him in a loud voice. She just said 4 words, 5 words. Krishna Das, don't be envious. And and he calmed down and stopped being like that. And it was a very important incident for me, because it was like you could say, like, devotees say, how do I deal with envy? How do I deal with anger? But one very simple, effective thing you can do with yourself, she did it with her son, which is almost like herself, but we do it with ourselves, as you say, Mukta, don't be envious, because we can see the envious thoughts arise in our mind. That's one of the real real features of being devotees. Devotees are so introspective. We're always examining and analyzing not only our words and our actions, but we're always analyzing our thoughts. So we're very aware of what we're thinking, of what we're doing, and we're always analyzing them in relationship to the instructions that we've received in disciplic succession. So when you see envious thoughts coming up in your mind, or you see angry thoughts or lusty thoughts coming up in your mind, greedy thoughts, you can just simply chastise yourself and say, Mukta, don't be envious or don't be angry. Why are you angry? And don't be lusty, don't be greedy. And you'll be amazed at how effective that technique can be for people. Always ask about that. What do I do about envy? And one thing you can do is just chastise yourself. And it can be very effective. Okay, so I'll stop there. Is anyone questions or comments? Okay, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Krishna, Krishna.